Okay, so I'd like to welcome you all to this afternoon's APCO community webinar for the federal budget, what it means for Australia. We're joined by some great panellists this afternoon, but first and foremost, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement of country, and we acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. We are very fortunate this afternoon to have a great panel of people joining us for a discussion about all good things around the budget and the future here in Australia, which is exciting. We have Minister Trevor Evans, the Assistant Minister for Waste Reduction and Environmental Management. We have Sam Andersen, the current board chair of the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation. We have Raphael, Geminder, the chairman of the Pact group, and we have Justin Frank, the Chief Sustainability and Communications Officer for SUEZ Australia and New Zealand, joining us. So we're going to kick off this afternoon with a little bit of a discussion piece by Minister Evans, who's going to discuss a wrap-up of the recent budget and some highlights there. There is an opportunity to do some Q&A at the end if we have some time. So if you do have a question you'd like us to ask towards the end of the session, please feel free to put that in the chat box. Just to note, the session is being recorded and will be available on the APCO website as part of the library of community webinars that are available as resources through APCO, and we do encourage you to participate by putting some questions in the chat box, and we'll have a look at those towards the end of the session. So without further ado, the process and the format for today will be, we will start with Minister Evans, and he will give us a little bit of a wrap up, and then we're going to invite Sam, Ruffy and Justin to speak to you a little bit about what they see as being some of those top opportunities in our space moving forward, and have some questions at the end of that. So we'll start with Minister Evans. For those of you who are not familiar with Minister Evans, he comes from a small business family and is the former chief of the National Retail Association. Minister Evans has a strong track record of fighting for jobs, innovation and the economy, so all good things. The Minister has also worked as an economist in the energy and utility sectors, as well as in consumer protection and competition policy at the ACCC, which have provided him with the experience and knowledge to effectively engage in and develop good policy making. Minister Evans holds a Bachelor of Economics and Law and has a long history of supporting charities and community organisations. First and foremost, the Minister states his role is to represent the people of Brisbane at home and in Canberra. And with the Minister's experience in the private, public and not-for-profit sectors, he is a strong voice for Brisbane and an excellent advocate for effective waste reduction and environmental management in communities across Australia. So I welcome Minister Evans. If you'd like to come online and have a little bit of a chat, that would be great.
Thank you very, very much, Brooke, for that warm introduction. It's great to be with you and the whole team at APCO, and to all of your members and everybody who's on the line. Thank you as well for your time. I know how valuable it is. And can I actually just say, incidentally, this must be a very lucky and auspicious occasion. It hasn't rained for something like 8 weeks here in Brisbane, and as soon as Brooke started to introduce me, the rain has started pelting down on the roof above me. So hopefully it's not too noisy and you can all hear me just fine. But it's a fantastic challenge to have here. So the federal budget last week was a very significant one for the recycling, resource recovery and circular economy sectors. I think this is the first time that recycling has been called out as a key plank in a federal budget. And that, I guess, shows that a few more steps have been taken amongst many steps over the last year since the federal government decided to get much more heavily involved in recycling and waste reduction, to appoint in myself the first assistant minister at a federal level with responsibility for these types of policies and reforms. And it follows, I think many of you who have been on the journey with us would recognise it's been a very, very busy year of announcements and policy work, and there's a lot more to go as well. The content in the budget, I would summarise in two general themes. First of all, there was significant funding included in the federal budget around our recycling initiatives. And I'll come back to talk a little bit more about what those are and what they include and involve in a moment. Some of those, of course, were announced in months prior as we've gone about our policy work. But of course, it is always good to see the proof in the pudding and that the budget and the funding is actually there at the end of the day in the federal government's budget, and indeed it is. The other thing to talk about, and I think this is potentially the most significant game changer that there was in the budget, is that recycling and waste reduction has now been recognised by the federal government as one of the key planks for building a new, stronger economy as we secure Australia's future. Manufacturing and growing Australia's manufacturing sector, according to our competitive advantages, was of course one of the big take-home themes from this budget. And 6 particular areas where Australia has an edge or a competitive advantage were identified in the budget as places where federal government policies, reforms and funding will go to turbocharge our local manufacturing and indeed remanufacturing sectors in the years ahead. And I guess I can also report very faithfully that even in the few days that we've had since the budget, Brooke and APCO, other industry experts and leaders have already been a part of the conversations we've started to have as the Department of Environment and the Department of Industry have started to put shape to the 2, 5 and 10-year roadmaps that are going to be developed over the next few months to give shape to what the next steps of that agenda look like. But I guess the take-home message is this: between the record funding that's included in the budget, the link to the opportunity here for manufacturing and remanufacturing, the new Recycling Act, which is before the Parliament right now, our waste export bans, the turbocharged approach to product stewardship and the funding we've got on the table there, both for new schemes and for a centre of excellence, and a great number of the other reforms and initiatives that we've worked on and announced over the next year. We estimate that the recycling and waste reduction sectors will be supported to create over 10,000 new jobs around Australia in coming years as all of these pieces of work come together. Over 10,000 new jobs. And many of those jobs, as many of the people on the line would know, are likely to be created in exactly the parts of the country where we need to see them the most. And that's, of course, in regional towns and centres around Australia, in the outer suburbs and in some of our industrial and manufacturing centres. So that's the future, I guess, in terms of what we're looking at here. And that's where we're positioning recycling and waste reduction for the future. And it's an exciting future to be a part of. And I've really appreciated the deep involvement and engagement I've had along the way with everyone across the sector. And if you take home no other message today, it would be to keep speaking very closely with myself and APCO and your industry groups and associations to ensure that the expertise that you have when it comes to products, when it comes to packaging, when it comes to the recycling sector and the supply chains involved, the expertise and the knowledge that's in your brains is absolutely essential to be brought out to make sure that we get the very best out of the policy that's under development at the moment and the next steps that we'll be taking. So the big dollars in the budget include a number of very significant recycling funding packages which we intend to move the dial. The first one is the proof's in the pudding. This has already been announced, but $190 million from the federal government towards the Recycling Modernisation Fund. That $190 million is co-funding, and it's being delivered through the states and territories. They are their dollars are being matched dollar for dollar by the federal government, and there's an expectation that that is matching dollars in funding from industry as well. So in other words, we are at multiple levels of government, all the governments of Australia coming together to co-fund what industry is willing to invest in. The Recycling Modernisation Fund is a direct next step as we introduce our Recycling Act and we move to stop the export of mixed plastics, whole tyres, mixed paper cardboard, and contaminated glass streams to other countries around the world. Obviously, as we stop those exports over coming years, we don't want to see the potential value in those recyclables just lost through dumping or landfilling here onshore. And so it's an incredibly important part of our strategy to ensure that we can, at the same time as those exports are coming into force, the timeline has been very, very carefully calibrated to ensure that we can just in time ensure we are building the sorts of facilities and infrastructure in every state and territory around Australia that we need to be able to receive those recyclables, to sort them, to process them so that we can capture the value that's inherent in those streams of waste or recyclables and make sure that they are kept inside of the economy and can go back into the manufacturing supply chains that we have here in the country and that we intend to have here in the country as we position manufacturing more strongly in the new economy going forwards. There's a lot more I could say about it, but I'm conscious that that time is limited, so I'll move on, but happy to draw out any more on that in future questions. The next biggest funding that's included in the budget is a $35 million package, which is intended to cover all of the federal government-led actions under the National Waste Policy Action Plan. So many of you will be aware that the very first thing we had to do as the federal government stepped more heavily into recycling was to concede that we don't have all of the levers and the powers at our disposal. Lots of those continue to sit with the states and territories who are traditionally responsible for these things and continue to have a lot of the powers to make laws and to give effect to new policies. So we got all of the governments around Australia together, updated the national waste policy and created an action plan that sat underneath it to make sure there were measurable milestones, appropriate funding, and clear responsibility for who is leading what, who is supporting them, and which government is meant to be leading what at particular times. So the $35 million that we're talking about here will go towards things like, for instance, supporting the federal government's leadership for our targets around reducing food waste and organic waste over the next 10 years. And so the federal government's recent call out for expressions of interest to lead a voluntary commitment program for industry to start to really move the dial on reducing food and organic waste. That money, for instance, will come out of this $35 million package that we have here to support the federal government's activities under the action plan. The next biggest item in the budget is almost $25 million around the federal government's leadership on tracking waste. So this is about visibility of the data. It sounds a little bit boring, but put yourself in my shoes as an incoming assistant minister and a bit of a policy nerd. Of course, the first thing that I asked for when I was appointed, I said, show me the numbers. I want to see the data. I want to see the spreadsheets. And many of you would know that that sort of information, that data just doesn't exist in the Australian landscape. It's a little bit different in each jurisdiction. The definitions don't line up, and a lot of it is very clearly from years gone by. There's nothing in real time and there's not a national picture there. So as we've sought and obtained all of the states and territories agreement to the different steps that we've been taking, one of the conditions was that they will be feeding in real time their data and information into a new national platform so that all of us, including people in the recycling sector, in the waste sector, in sustainability, entrepreneurs, new small business innovators, everyone can use that information to see what opportunities there are to make a difference and potentially to create fantastic new businesses out of the information that will be there. I think I've already spoken for my 10 minutes. I don't know how it went so quickly. Those are the biggest items. Very happy to draw more out in questions. Back over to you, Brooke.
Thank you very much, Minister Evans. And I think one of the key things and exciting things there for us is we're not looking at a budget that is just about the very important area of infrastructure and technologies, but also addressing some of those key governance and information areas that are really important to drive activity. So I know both myself and Sam especially are very excited about the support for the implementation of the National Waste Policy Action Plan, having being responsible for 11 actions in there from an APCO perspective, and also very keen to see the coalescing of data in that national landscape. It would be a very powerful thing indeed. So thank you. And I will move on to our board chair of APCO, Sam Andersen. So Sam holds a law degree and held senior executive positions with ANZ Bank, Commonwealth Bank of Australia and National Australia Bank. Following a successful career in banking and finance, she was the Chief Financial Officer and Chief Operating Officer at a number of ASX-listed IT companies leading transformation initiatives. She led the initial public offering for and was Managing Director of a listed allied health services company which tripled in size under her leadership. She currently serves as a director on a number of government, public, unlisted corporations and member-owned organisations. Sam is chair of Beyond Bank Australia, the Australian Packaging Covenant Organisation, and the Financial Sustainability Advisory Board for Victoria Police. She is also a director of Victorian Land Registry Services, Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Trust, Agricultural Victoria Services Proprietary Limited, and chair of the Audit and Risk Management Committee for the Department of Premier and Cabinet in Victoria. So somebody who's always got something to do. And we're very glad to have her here to talk with us today. So Sam, if I can have you unmute yourself and give us a little bit of your insight into what you think are some of the top 3 opportunities moving forward based on what we've seen in the budget so far.
Thanks very much, Brooke, and thank you very much, Trevor, for summarising all of the things that go with this budget for the recycling industry. I think it's a fabulous opportunity for us all that we can take care of. Just to set the scene a little bit, I think everybody will know that APCO is a backbone organisation for a collective impact approach to improvement in the packaging ecosystem. Our focus being, of course, to meet the national packaging targets by 2025. But if we just look across the team of people who are in that collective impact group, it includes the packaging suppliers and manufacturers, as well as the retailers of products, consumers particularly, material collectors and local councils, sorters of that material, reprocessors and manufacturers of the recyclate, as well as government, federal, state and local. So, Brooke wrangles our 9 government entities all the time to keep ourselves in track with them, and she does a wonderful job of it. If we look then at all of those people, we have an opportunity to really play in 7 key strategic intervention points to improve the packaging ecosystem in Australia, and each team member has their own little part to play. And those 1% that people might make a difference of will make the biggest difference across the entire system. So design means that we need to use the sustainable packaging guidelines to design our packaging effectively for recoverability and recyclability. We need to produce the packaging in a recyclable way, and we're doing a reasonable job of that, but want to get a lot better. And we want to phase out problematic materials. We also want to make sure that the use and disposal is correct. So we've really promoted that as Australasian recycling label and support all the Recycle Right initiatives across the states for both consumers and businesses. And then, of course, there's a collection. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have a harmonised process and upgraded facilities to get better material recovery standards? Because if those materials are cleaner, it makes it much easier for the next crowd, which is the guys that are going to be reprocessing and manufacturing new recycled content for use, hopefully back in packaging, but also in a number of other different places. The last 2 parts are the parts that are really economically important, and that is the creation of markets for recycled content, whether that be in packaging, which we really desire as a first priority, but in other places too, and also making sure that they have a higher value than any alternative use, and particularly in terms of cost avoidance for landfill. So APCO's members have been working really, really hard on the first 3 and the last of these. the recycled content, as well as design, production and disposal through use with consumers. So it's been wonderful to see the uptake of the Australasian recycling label and the support of the federal government. And thanks, Trevor, for all the times you've mentioned our new campaign, Check It Before You Chuck It, recently. It's very, very exciting to see that campaign going out there now. But what's in the federal budget that is going to reinforce all of those activities? The federal government is really reaching out here to incentivise industry to create more positive change in the recycling system with those specific funds allocated to modernise the infrastructure. It's designed to support that 80% target of diversion from landfill by 2030, but has the serendipitous benefit for us of supporting our national packaging targets too. And Minister Evans has already outlined those stimulus plans for the modernisation fund, which anticipates that co-contribution from industry. And I think that's one of our biggest opportunities, is to find a way to spend that money very, very wisely. And like Brooke, I'm so excited about the waste data. The data lake that is going to be put together there is going to add so much value to support the waste policy action plan, and I can't wait for that to happen. Sooner the better. But what the budget really says is that recycling is the new black. It's one of those 6 industries that's targeted for genuine job creation in the budget, and that has the real potential to drive much needed investment in sorting, recovering and reprocessing. Not that that's the only place, because infrastructure projects aren't the only winners in the budget. In addition to that modernisation fund, I think corporations need to look at the other incentives for growth and investment opportunities. I'm going to scoot through these really, really quickly, but make sure that you touch base with your finance and accounting teams to see if there's something that you just can't take advantage of to improve your impact in the packaging system. So if you've got a project ready to go and talk to the cash boffins. They might like some of these things. The government has announced an immediate tax write-off for expenditure on depreciable assets for all of those that are going to be first used or installed ready to use by 30th of June 2020. So you can get quite big projects up there, and that counts if your turnover is less than $5 billion. So this counts a lot of industry. In addition to that, there's a wonderful program in place which helps smooth and cushion some of the economic uncertainty, especially for people who are contemplating investments in assets, because the government is allowing for the first time an offset of past tax losses against future profits, and a clawback, if you like, a loss carryback of losses that have been incurred since 2019 to offset future profits. And this is a wonderful cushioning activity for the government that shouldn't be underestimated. The mid-sized businesses also get a little bit of a tick in here. If you've got turnover up to $50 million, there's a big range of immediate deductions and FBT exemptions, which I think is really exciting for smaller businesses to kick in their 1% of the change. But innovation doesn't miss out too, and we do have some materials where commercial scale solutions are yet to be developed. And the changes to the R&D tax incentives and refinements to the proposed R&D intensity test make that incentive much more generous, especially for larger companies. So don't forget to ask your finance team if any of those programs might be used to fund some initiatives in your businesses. In effect, what all of those commitments do when you join them together is to reduce the cost of capital and increase the return on investment of new projects. So that's the benefit that we've got out of this funding government, plus with the concessions that I just mentioned. At APCO, we often talk about that collective impact program of work that's required to solve the wicked and complex issues that are diminishing the effectiveness in our ecosystem for packaging. And with state budgets due to come out over the next few weeks, there remains plenty of opportunities for the states to join in this critical work and to support investment in the recycling sector to help companies invest and grow jobs in recycling. Now, back early in the year, we attended the National Plastics Summit, and I asked a few questions, and some of them I think might have got a little bit of an answer in this. One of the things I asked was, are we prepared to disrupt the traditional economic flows in our system for the collective benefit of reducing waste and increasing recycling? And can we get a nationally consistent standard of collection standards to ensure that there's quality materials, not just to support recycling, but for the clean supply that people like Raphael need to actually make the best, highest value out of those materials that are collected. I asked specifically a question about how governments could provide support and enable co-investment to drive investment from the private sector. So big tick there to the budget. It's just wonderful to see that amount of funding committed with co-investment on the way. I'd also like to see a few more things around faster approvals for critical infrastructure, because we've got to build it and we've got to get it done as quickly as possible. And the other thing I wanted to see was governments really looking to support commitments to procure recycled content in roads and other infrastructure and promote consumer education. So big tick for the check it before you chuck it campaign. The federal government, with its support about the ARL and the investment infrastructure, has really laid out the challenge to industry and state to answer some of these questions quite successfully. And what we must do is take that fund and create more supply chain partnerships, like Raphael's made with Asahi and Cleanaway, to deliver infrastructure genuinely at scale. Small solutions won't speed us to where we need to go, and states and industry now have an opportunity to create leverage to drive at-scale projects. Whilst the federal government has kick-started it, and it's a very good start, we need greater impact faster. So there's still work to be done, and I encourage you all to keep looking for where these opportunities are in the budget initiatives today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sam. And I always love the fact that Sam asks a question in March and gets an answer in October, then takes it to the next level and asks another 3. But that's what having great board chairs is all about. So thank you, Sam. And I think, a really important point Sam there makes at the end is about the impact of the scale of impact. There's a lot of work to be done in this space, and we've made some great progress over the last 3 years. And when I think about scale and real true impact, I remember a conversation I had with Raphael, must be nearly 15 years ago now, 12, 15 years ago, and he spoke about being a first mover and the importance of, leading out from the front. And, one of the great things about the Pact organisation is they're always in that group. So let me introduce you to Raphael Geminder, the chairman of Pact Group. So the Pact Group, if you don't know who they are, is a leading Australasian packaging business in a broad range of rigid plastic and metal packaging. Pact Group was floated on the Australian Stock Exchange in December 2013, and Raphael remains a majority shareholder. After acquiring the Pact Group in 2002, Raphael transformed the business from a largely industrial-based packaging supplier to a fast-growing, energetic regional packaging leader. This has been achieved through business improvement and over 50 acquisitions during this period, so he's been quite busy. However, prior to acquiring the Pact Group, Raphael was a co-founder and chairman of Visy Recycling, growing it into the largest recycling company in Australia. Raphael holds an MBA in finance and was previously a funds broker in New York before immigrating to Australia. And he was appointed Victoria's first honorary consul to the Republic of South Africa in July 2006. And sits on a number of advisory and board positions. And I'll take this opportunity to offer a big congratulations not only to Raphael but to the whole Pact team, who were in the last week recognised as one of Australia and New Zealand's most innovative companies for the 8th consecutive year, and also a joint winner of the best pandemic pivot, which sounds slightly like a dance move, but I know isn't. It's all about being agile, and they won that in partnership with another APCO member, Browns Dairy, for the AFR's most innovative company list for 2020. So let me introduce you to Raphael.
Thank you, Brooke. That's a very kind introduction indeed. So maybe if I could just start off. I'm going to speak for 5 or 6 minutes and hopefully, give your audience an opportunity to think about some questions for us later in the panel. So firstly, can I just add my personal congratulations to Minister Evans and the federal government for their recent announcement in this year's budget. Of course, this marks a pivotal moment for the waste and recycling industry, as the recent announced funding will allow industry to create much needed local infrastructure to sort locally and to process Australians' waste. So this funding, supported by the ban on exporting waste, will ensure that valuable raw material remains onshore. Regulatory and fiscal changes will give industry confidence to invest behind new state-of-the-art facilities, giving Australians the domestic infrastructure they deserve. Pact announced last February at the National Plastics Summit our intention to invest $500 million in conjunction with industry and government towards building a local circular economy over the next 5 years. We are committed to leading the creation of a local plastics circular economy. The policy and budget announcements made since then provide an excellent framework to give industry the confidence to invest in smart, scaled solutions. Australia has lacked the necessary infrastructure to process our waste onshore. So government and industry will need to invest in scaled solutions to deliver a national footprint capable of processing Australia's waste. And to date, the recycling industry has suffered from a subscale, fragmented approach. The bottom line is we need to be able to match the raw material collected with end-use applications at scale. Pact Group recently commissioned a national study into consumer attitudes towards recycling. It showed that whilst over 90% of consumers try and do the right thing when they recycle, over 80% are not confident that they have recycled correctly. Confidence is low amongst consumers that material placed in recycling bins gets recycled, with about 90% of people believing that it actually goes to landfill anyway. There are many ways that industry can tackle this issue. Over half of the issues relating to recycling correctly relate to education. And so with that, Pact would like to congratulate both the federal government, APCO, and Planet Arc on the national education campaign of check it before you chuck it. We believe that this will improve the quality of material collected in the recycling streams, ensuring that greater value is retained through the process. So well done on that. That's a terrific initiative. There are other ways to improve the quality of recycling streams, including better household sortation through the addition of glass bins. Over 90% of consumers support this initiative, and we'd like to see this adopted nationally. This, coupled with the harmonisation and standardisation of recycling collections nationally, would significantly drive quality improvement in the materials collected and locally processed. We know that consumers are very interested in the inclusion of recycled content in products, with over 80 or 90% showing a preference for this type of packaging. Interesting for brand owners, nearly 80% of consumers stated that they'd be prepared to pay more for packaging which included recycled material. We feel there is an opportunity to identify locally recycled content on packaging so that consumers know that the waste locally collected and processed is being used in their packaging. The funding to build world-class local waste and recycling infrastructure offers Australia an unbelievable opportunity to create a new advanced manufacturing industry, one that includes R&D, sorting and processing of local collected recycled material, and advanced manufacturing in primary and secondary packaging. This industry will be self-sustaining and create thousands of jobs across our country. We heard Minister Evans talk about 10,000 new jobs. I hope that that's a conservative number. It'll be a new industry which will contribute significantly to our economy and environment. And so I want to just conclude by applauding the federal government's vision and significant contribution to giving Australia and Australians this opportunity to create a new industry, to create thousands of new jobs, and to protect our environment through the creation of a circular economy. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafi. Thank you very much. And okay, we will move on to Justin. So let me tell you a little bit about Justin. Justin Frank is the Chief Sustainability and Communications Officer for SUEZ Australia and New Zealand. He works with customers, businesses and governments to unlock sustainable value in their operations and communities. After spending almost 20 years, giving away the age here, Justin, working in business which lead the way when it comes to the circular economy. Justin has a passion for the environment and knows how to drive customer-centric innovation to improve the customer experience and make sustainable change. As part of SUEZ leadership team, Justin is focused on driving the circular economy and progress towards the UN SDG goals in Australia and New Zealand. In particular, reinventing the way water and waste is managed to shape sustainable environment. Now, Justin is a man of action and he holds a Masters of Business Administration and of Law. So let me hand over to Justin if you're there and ready to go, Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Brooke, and it's great to see the alignment between my esteemed colleagues, panel colleagues. They've said a huge amount of the things I would have said, so I'll try not to repeat too much. But I would like to repeat the applaud to the federal government and Minister Evans for really putting the money where the mouth is to really support the industry through to meeting the coag ban legislation changes and recycling legislation changes. So real kudos to the government to stimulate that positive movement forward. I particularly am keen on the support for avoidance and reuse before we get to the recycling. So the food waste avoidance piece. We have our partnership with UMI, which is a very innovative startup, having a digital matching platform for perfectly edible food and finding offtake markets for it to reduce costs and avoid that landfill associated cost and environmental impact. So I think it's imperative that we also do focus on that avoid and reuse piece before we even get to the recycling and obviously the associated water usage in food production. So kudos there again. The product stewardship and design in packaging that Sam mentioned is absolutely critical. I think we really do need to leverage the funding to design out the waste in packaging so that we can really help the recyclers sort through the different types of commodities so that we can get a clean stream. The lack of domestic offtake here is really been a problem and stifled the progression of the industry for many a year, along with the relatively low cost of landfill in different states. So, you know, to stimulate that pull demand of offtake markets is absolutely critical. And again, I think it's a big step forward to start that transition. Sam picked up on the faster approvals. I think my concern remains, and it's something that we have to collaborate on as a federal government, state government, industry, not-for-profits, NGOs, that we find a way to get the facilities, the lead time, the planning permission, the social license, which is critical to develop these facilities that can process the recycle up and running, so that we can meet the timeline and the targets set by the government. Most people in Australia are absolutely on board for recycling and for other technologies to better deal with waste, but generally don't want it in their backyard. So that social license piece is critical, and it takes time, it takes engagement, and it takes education. The education piece is the other key piece. So Raphael, you mentioned the confidence in doing the right thing. You have different socioeconomic backgrounds in different areas, and we still find that the yellow bin isn't necessarily full of the right things. We need to educate the people like you and me to make sure we're getting the right things in the yellow bin and move more things out of the red bin to that yellow bin to get that clean source. The modernisation fund is key. We need to upgrade our facilities as an industry. We've also just been recognised in the AFR Most Innovative Companies. Thanks for the plug. Number 5 in our category. for our glass crushing and washing facility. Now, we had to be agile and pivot with the current ban looming and the market demand changes, and we're creating a high quality glass sand that's being taken domestically for road base. Is that the best offtake market? Probably not. It would be nice to see it being made into new glass bottles, but again, we need to look at the competitiveness of the domestic products versus the cheaper imports, and we could go on for a long time there as well. In terms of transition technologies, the recycling piece will improve the overall diversion from landfill, but we're still going to have a fairly large solid waste problem that we need to overcome. And I do hope that the energy from waste transition will help us get to a more circular economy. The creation of jobs for the construction of those facilities and the huge diversion of waste from landfill is something that we still need to focus on as a country, and educate communities that it's not such a bad thing if done properly. And then the associated residuals can be used in road and construction. Sam also mentioned the procurement, sustainable procurement and government procurement, both at state and federal level. I think that's critical to create those big sinkholes, and taking that phrase from Raphael when we first launched the ARL, there are opportunities to create decent sinkholes of pool demand that are controlled by both federal and state governments, that both the waste industry and the recyclers can really work together on to feed. And really, it does lead to that job creation piece, 3 or 4 jobs in recycling versus landfill. I think that sovereign capability that is much needed, and we've seen that through the COVID response, and ultimately that landfill diversion, I think, is a big step forward. There's still more collaboration that's needed, as discussed, but we're very grateful and looking forward to working on all those opportunities.
So I have to also apparently acknowledge Justin and SUEZ AFR win as well, which I missed completely. I do apologise for. But congratulations, Justin.
Right, I was only pulling you
and the team.
I was only pulling you Brooke.
Okay, I think it's great. I think that's, we've heard from some great speakers, and I think, both Rafi and Justin made some really great points there, and especially around the education. We have seen the launch, as Sam mentioned earlier, of the Check It Before You Chuck It campaign this week, which is part of well, it's not a small part, but it is a part of a much larger national consumer education campaign that lasts for over 2 years and is actually funded by federal government. So it's key to see that we are attacking this problem in lots of different ways and at many different levels, and it's sometimes a little overwhelming how much there is to do, but like eating a good elephant, you chunk it down a bite at a time, and we try and attack it just as we can. So thank you to all of you for those your wise words and your contribution here. We have a couple of questions that have come through, so we will ask about those. Meredith, did we have some questions that have come through the Q&A there that we wanted to use, or have I got Meredith? Just wait one moment. No, I've lost her. Okay, that's not a problem. Okay, so let us just have a little look here, see what questions we've got coming through. Oh, okay, this is an interesting one, and one that has been red hot for conversation in the last couple of weeks. So Justin sits on our collective action group, which oversees the work for the 2025 targets, and this is one of the key areas which has been up for discussion, and it's around the most challenging target that we have in the National Waste Action Plan for packaging, which is around plastics, and it's around the 70% recycled packaging target, and are we ready to manage this on shore? I think the short answer to that is no, and I think the interesting part that maybe we can ask the panelists to respond to is what are the opportunities and what do we see being the things that need to happen for us to reach that 70% target. We acknowledge that that is and I think it's important to clarify, when we talk about the 70% target for plastics, what is achievable in terms of what is a known quantity is a long way from the 70%. But the 70% is what we need to do to make a transition to a circular economy. So when we talk about targets, it's really important to understand there's something that we need to get to, and it's not necessarily about knowing all of the answers today, but it's about recognizing what are the key steps or the principles that have to be at play to get to that 70%. You know, and they may very well be different interventions to what we foresee today. So a big part of work that the APCO work that we'll see at the end of this month and being launched at the AIP conference on the 27th, I think, of October, will be the monitoring program for the 2025 targets. And this will work, come back to the intervention points that Sam mentioned when she was speaking. They're the things that we're monitoring to see how we get to these targets, like the 70% target. And part of the work is understanding what are some of those other interventions that may need to happen to get there. But perhaps I can go around the panelists and ask them what are their thoughts around what is the need, what would be some of the key principles or approaches that you think will be important to drive that 70% target for plastic packaging in Australia. Perhaps we can start with you, Ruffy, if that's okay. Would that be all right? If you have an opinion on that.
So I think there are lots of ways to think about this. Issue. You know, the most obvious one is to focus on demand creation. So, you know, Pact has done a lot of work visiting various brand owners and talking to them about, you know, how do we facilitate a good discussion around partnering with brand owners to ensure that they start thinking about including more recycled content into their product. So for me, you know, if you, the best way to improve that rate that you're talking about is to actually pull it. So if you've got huge demand for raw material, the processors will find ways to get more of it. And I'll give you a great anecdotal story. You know, I remember coming this is like a long time ago, when I first arrived in Australia, we had one paper mill, and my late father-in-law was at a conference, and they were talking about, you know, how are we going to get more raw material, because we're going to run out of raw material. You know, the paper mills have got more and more demand for that raw material. Where are we going to get it from? And my late father-in-law back then said, and remember, we only had one paper mill. He said, don't worry about the raw material. As we sell more paper, we will find ways to mine it and to get it. And, you know, miraculously over, you know, a 20, 30-year period, demand in the paper mills went up, and miraculously, you know, it was our job to find it. And so we created all the programs to find it. So I think part of, you know, the conundrum we've got here is, you know, we want that participation rate to go up, but it needs to be demand driven. So, you know, the job that needs to be done here is putting pressure on brand owners to change their procurement practices, to move faster, on including recycled content. You know, I think the government's doing a great job. We already see, in, for instance, roads and noise walls, we see the government working very hard to change standards, to include recycled content in tenders. So I think if we have more and more of that, that will drive that number up.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sam, maybe you could talk about that in the context, you know, recycled content and that demand, and the pledge program that we're undertaking in APCO. I think that's going to be a key identifying practice for the demand that's out there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. My answer to that question would be not yet. But if you take the current view of the situation, it'll be really, really difficult to meet those targets. But if you actually look for what might be a better view of the future situation, which is something that we've got an opportunity to create, it is exactly as Raphael said, you know, how do we show people who might put in place this reprocessing material facilities that there is demand from brand owners for packaging materials in this space. And I think that, you know, being associated with brands in APCO, we understand how much and how loud they are screaming for this. What we need to do is to find a way to demonstrate that more clearly. And so we are in the process. I think we're in the second round of a survey at the moment to start talking about pledges and to help identify how much material of what kind might be needed by our manufacturers in Australia for packaging. I think once we get that, that will help drive, because you know, supply is one thing, demand is the other. And I agree with Richard Pratt. You know, if you've got demand, finding supply is a good problem to have, because there's always a way to actually, you know, meet that need. So essentially, if you put the shoe on the other foot, our brand owners are going to be saying, we need supply of food grade packaging material, or we need supply of. And I think back to, and recently there was that interesting article in America about the plastics recycling in America. 20 years ago, they said that PET was recyclable, but it wasn't being recycled because the plants and things weren't there. But they are now, because we have invented and built the facilities, because there was demand for the product. And that will happen with a large number of other products. If you look at HDPE, if you look at PP, that demand is being growing all the time and the gaps are being filled. What we need to do is speed it up. So hopefully when we identify with our brand owners the large demand for the different kinds of packaging materials that we need recycled content for, it will give more confidence to industry to invest in those reprocessing facilities.
And perhaps, Minister Evans, you might have a view on the 70% target and reaching that here in Australia?
Definitely do, Brooke. And I think I want to, I guess, drive home a couple of the points that have already been made. One being, there's a lot of reforms and a lot of policies that have to come together all at once. And there's a lot of active players, and there's a lot of governments, and there's a lot of industry players as well, who are all focused on the parts of the puzzle here that they're responsible for. One of the things that I try to always keep in mind is that we are now, as a federal government, 1 year into our journey. And there's not a single thing that you can do that solves this problem. What you need to do is work simultaneously on a number of different aspects of this challenge. And I push back sometimes against colleagues and commentators who talk about microeconomic reform in the waste sector. This isn't a case of the federal government stepping in, adjusting a few laws, updating a few regulations and saying, job done, there's going to be a perfect market response now. Because a lot of this has been traditionally dealt with, pushed down to local councils, treated as an essential service, and we are a long way away from market type responses in terms of cost reflectivity, cost recovery, and treating these potential resource streams as something that has value. So we need to do a lot on the capacity and supply side, and that's where funds like our modernisation fund come to the table and start to give us the supply side capacity that we need. But don't pretend for a moment that what we've got on the table right now is all that there will be. The Recycling Modernisation Fund has been carefully calibrated to deal with the 650,000 tonnes of materials that we're not going to be sending offshore anymore. I'm not pretending that that's a perfect solution for all of the rest of the waste streams and the potentially recyclable materials that are out there. What I would say is look to what we've done so far as an indication for where we're going next and the principles that we've brought to the table as we've sought to solve that problem. I was with the Prime Minister in Brisbane looking at a recycling facility just 2 days ago, and he said something that was music to my ears, which was, what we have on the table right now is just the first step. There's a lot more to come. And that strengthens my arm when I go back to the Expenditure Review Committee inside a government and ask for the next bit of funding and the next reform and the next initiative after that. Can I just quickly in closing touch on the demand side, because it is a very important part of the puzzle too. We've got to build capacity, supply, we've got to build demand, we've got to build markets and meeting places where people find each other and build engagement where traditionally there's been none. We've got to do the education and awareness piece. We've got to do R&D. There's a lot of things that have to be done simultaneously. The demand side is taking up an equal amount of our attention and our focus. So right now, the federal government is updating the federal government's procurement policy to bring notions of sustainable procurement and the use of recycled content into the value proposition in all of our purchasing decisions. We're creating sustainable procurement guidelines to help give guidance to all of the people that do procurement right across the federal government departments and agencies. We are taking a bottom-up approach as well as that top-down approach. So we're identifying huge resource-intensive infrastructure and other projects that we have on the go that we can use to showcase the use of recycled content at great scale. And we're doing that piece of work that Brooke alluded to, which is, no, sorry, I think it was Raphael alluded to it, which is the creation of new standards and guidelines so that every council, every developer, every industry player around Australia can say, we always used to do this according to the old specs, and now automatically, no need to ask permission, no need to ask for special exemptions, we can use this other recycled content equivalent, no further questions asked. We're rolling out some of those standards and guidelines before the end of this year for crumb tyre rubber. We're going to have standards and guidelines for the use of plastics early next year, and we'll just keep rolling through them from there.
Thank you very much, Minister Evans. Justin, did you want to add to that conversation as well?
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said, and the standards piece was something I was definitely going to pick up on. So yeah, getting that right quality so everyone in the industry knows whether it's a certain flake or a certain pellet that they're producing, I think makes it much more simple to drive that change. And with us being a net importer of goods, there's actually a growth opportunity as well with potentially the export of those commodities if the demand isn't quite there in the short term. So different plastics will have different opportunities. I think we need to look at packaging not just as primary packaging, but secondary packaging, tertiary packaging, and opportunities for manual handling products that will continue to drive circular economies as other offtake avenues for that recycled material. But if we get the quality right, then that can be built into the design of the facilities and fast track that investment.
Thank you, Justin. Well, I have to call an end to our session, and I would like to thank all the panelists for their questions. Any questions that are in there in the Q&A, we will take them and respond to them offline. A big thank you to everyone for your contribution today. And the On Point APCO team have already dropped the link for the pledge survey program in the chat box below. So if you haven't already done that, get involved. Otherwise, thank you so much, Minister Evans, Ruffy, Sam and Justin for your very, very valuable contribution. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to talking on with you again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Take care.